how do we get to a point where everything's open, but yet in a College World Series, because there are some positive COVID tests on a team, that team can't play? The NCAA came down with the news that NC State was out of the College World Series at 1:10 a.m. In Omaha, 2:10 on the East Coast. And that's how NC State learned they were no longer going to be allowed to play. I want to get to the protocols and how hopefully this is the last incident of this moving forward. But Paul, I have thought about this for the last 2 days. What if NC State beat Vandy on Friday when they were allowed to play? They were allowed to play on Friday, and a mere handful of hours later, kicked out of the tournament. They were allowed to play knowing that they had positive tests on their roster, and then not allowed to play on Saturday knowing they had positive tests on their roster. What if NC State would have won? They had their best hitter up. The game was 3-1, best hitter up with 2 runners on, I believe. Vandy gets out of the inning. But NC State was in that game despite everything against them.
Yeah, and so had they won that game, they were in.
They were in the
Vandy
College
had
World
to
Series
win
final.
twice
Right.
to get through. They were on the losers bracket side of this thing. I hadn't thought of that. But had they won, I mean, this would be a much bigger, much uglier story because they would have advanced Vandy, I presume.
I think they would have done what the public wants them to do right now, which is extend the tournament. Mississippi State in this scenario would have won. It doesn't matter if it's Mississippi State or Texas. That was also a great game on Saturday. I think they would have allowed NC State some time to test out and play the College World Series final.
Did they explain why they were unwilling to wait and how long it would have taken for them to have sorted things out better for NC State?
They did not explain it based on what I have seen.
I mean, it's not like they've got a venue issue like a lot of events would have. This is one of those events that has no venue issue. I mean, there might be minor league stuff there or whatever going on. It's B level compared to their main event, right? And so if you're talking 24, 48, even 36, even 72 hours, it really wouldn't be a big deal. You'd be asking Mississippi State or Texas to wait. They might object a little bit to the flow of things, but they also be assured of rested pitching. So they'd know that they were going into the finals with a clean slate in terms of starting their best pitchers. So I don't know that you'd get a huge objection from the other side. So what is the downside there to letting? Now, I don't know that NC State did its end of the bargain, and so maybe in the NCAA's view, it deserved a punishment for failing to follow protocol.
Well, even those who followed protocols were kicked out of this tournament, and that's my biggest issue with it. There were vaccinated players who were tested positive for COVID-19 that ended up being the reason why they canceled NC State. They were canceled for the tournament. They ended up with 8 positive tests going throughout the entire week. They had 2 positive tests that led to the delay on Friday as we went off the air. And subsequently, we're allowed to play. That total was at 4 positives by the time they played the game. And then they played after the game, that game was over by 5 or 6 p.m. roughly.
All right.
They were canceled from the tournament at 1:10 a.m.
10 hours later.
And I can't reconcile in my mind why the numbers that came back on top of what we've seen, where there were vaccinated players who tested positive that added to their total number. They were not being tested because they were vaccinated.
Well, see, the question to me, so then they were tested?
They were tested because unvaccinated players tested positive.
See, the big question to me, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're vaccinated but you get the virus, you can't shed enough to give the virus. Okay? So you should be in a different bucket and not count. Now, how many unvaccinated players do you have that could get it from the unvaccinated guys who have it and are shedding?
Well, that's fine, but they're tested anyway, and there were unvaccinated players who were testing negative also. Like, we're focused on the unvaccinated players who tested positive. What about the other players who had tested negative that were allowed to play and were following protocols? There are, according to the numbers I looked up, there are 35 players on a college baseball team, 27 of which are receiving scholarship for some money.
At least a piece.
It's something. They could have fielded a team. And I'm trying to figure out why, as we sit here in June, why you can have a full stadium, unmasked. You can have teams of fully vaccinated players, as I'm presuming Vanderbilt is, because it's a part of their admissions. You have to be vaccinated to go to Vanderbilt. They're not tested unless they're mixed with a team that was unvaccinated, like NC State, and I think subsequently they have been vaccinated or tested since, and they're fine. And that goes back to the NFL regular season where we saw the breakout with the Titans and teams that were tested after facing them. Right. My question, though, is how do we get to a point where everything's open, but yet in a College World Series, because there are some positive COVID tests on a team, that team can't play? I don't get that part of it. I walked into a restaurant this weekend under zero protocol. I can attend a concert this weekend. Bonnaroo is sold out at an outdoor venue. They're not testing to get into the Bonnaroo venue, but for some reason the players have to be tested to participate in a tournament in an open, completely open air facility and allowing 100% capacity. On top of it. That's the part I'm struggling with. And according to D1 Sports, who I have followed, D1Baseball.com, they say, hey, the real hard part of trying to wrestle with what the NCAA did is they're on one hand saying, hey, we're doing this on behalf of the health and safety of our players. Meanwhile, there have been people that visit these team hotels. They're not in a bubble. So this is not the NCAA tournament. This is not the NBA playoff bubble. This is a tournament in Omaha. And while they're following certain precautions, it wasn't necessarily the same precautions that we saw in March.
Yeah.
And NC State, unfortunately, is sent packing because of it. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you're notified every time Outkick 360 goes live. We are live weekdays, 11 a.m. Central, noon Eastern, right here across the Outkick network. And while you're at it, like this video and let us know what you think in the comments below.